Hi everyone, in today's video we are going to make crock fermented pickles. If the idea of making pickles is appealing to you, but you don't want to get involved in the canning process, maybe you don't have the equipment, you don't want to be that involved with it, fermenting cucumbers is a wonderful way to get a really great pickle with everything that you already have probably in your kitchen. So crock fermented pickles are also known as sour pickles. And this is a very old traditional way of making pickles. I don't really go to a specific recipe per se, but there is a book called Wild Fermentation, and in that book they have like a sour pickle recipe, and I generally stick to the brine portions that they suggest using, which is 3/4 cup of salt per half gallon of water. I actually go a little bit less than that because they are quite salty. Now this video will lapse many days. I don't know, based on the weather right now, depending on if it's warmer, I think we're kind of in for some cooler weather. We may not, the pickles may not ferment quite as quickly. So this video might even span 2 weeks because I want to show you the entire process from the day I start them until they're done, and then they can go in my fridge for storage. I have made enough dill pickles. I've canned enough dill pickles that I want for this year, so I'm going to start fermenting anything that we don't eat. And so I actually collected for a few days cucumbers, and this probably won't fill my half gallon completely, but I'm still going to use a half gallon jar because I really like fermenting cucumbers in this size container. I have plenty of them. There's lids that fit. They fit well in these big bowls to catch any kind of brine overflow, and they just work really great. The only other thing that I'm going to add, at least in this round of them, is some fresh dill. I picked that a couple of days ago, but it's still really good. If you don't have fresh dill, you can use dried dill weed, dill seed. You can add peppercorns. You can make them spicy by adding peppers, or if you don't have fresh peppers, you can use dried spices, some crushed red pepper, gochujaro if you happen to have some Korean red pepper flakes. You can add peppercorns, maybe I said that already. Peppercorns are often added to a sour pickle. Any kind of onion, garlic, if you would like, that can be added as well. And if you saw my dill pickle recipe, we put some horseradish leaves in there for crispness. Those can also be added to fermented pickles. Whether you have grape leaves, horseradish leaves, and I still haven't gone back to look, but I know there are a few other kinds of leaves that you can add to either canned pickles or fermented pickles that are supposed to aid in crispness. I've done these without and they turn out great, so we're just gonna go with this. So I have already washed up my cucumbers really well. You wanna scrub them with a good stiff brush. This is the brush that I use. It's just got really good stiff bristles. That's what you want to scrub your cucumbers with. So I've already done that step, and I am going to go ahead and cut off the blossom end and part of the stem end of these cucumbers as well. Again, if you saw my dill pickle recipe, the only end I was really concerned about was the blossom end. Blossom ends can make pickles mushy. There have been times when I've made these pickles and the base end where it attaches to the vines is quite tough. So I decided I'm going to take off some of that preemptively now. So while these have all been scrubbed up, I haven't completely cut off all of those ends. So I'm going to finish doing that, and then we'll move on to the next step. I actually am going to just hold off on cutting those for just one more minute. I am going to get my brine going because I want my salt to be completely dissolved. Now, when you're doing this kind of fermenting, you want to make sure that you're not using chlorinated water. Chlorinated tap water highly interferes with the process of fermentation. So no matter what you're fermenting, if you're going to use a brine, you want to make sure that you're using unchlorinated water. Whether it's some distilled that you purchase, or if you have a high quality filter, that's good too. And so here is the salt. If you did not want salt with the flecks and minerals and things in it, you can just use any kind of canning pickling salt, sea salt. You just want to make sure that it doesn't have the anti-caking agents and things like that that a lot of table salts do. This is my bucket of real salt, so as you can see, it clumps, but it just, it's not a big deal. And I'd much rather have something that is, pure and things like that than the alternatives. So I don't mind using it. And this is what I use for all my canning and everything usually. So I'm just going to give this a little stir. And then I'll just keep working on my cucumbers. Okay, now that all my cucumbers are cut up, I did have that really big one, but that one was one that kind of got left behind when I was picking earlier this week, so it got really big, and I think that it's going to be too big to give a good, nice, even balance between the fermenting of all of these things, so we will gladly enjoy that. I'm going to go ahead and start filling this. Now, one thing I'm going to do is when you're fermenting, you don't want things to float above the water. And I don't even like things to come even close to it. So what I'm planning to do is put a lot of my little cucumbers at the bottom, because a lot of these big ones, they're a lot wider than the shoulders of this jar. So the big ones will help weigh these smaller ones down and prevent them from coming up. Lots of little ones. They are so fun. I kind of went crazy and picked a lot of extra little ones just because when it comes time to eating these, they are just such a fun little treat to grab. All right, and I also don't want my dill to get too far up, so I'm going to make sure that I get all my dill in before my jar gets too filled up. I think that's a pretty good amount of pickles, and I'll put my biggest one right there. And you know what? Look at that. It's wedged sideways, so it's pushing everything up. And I laid all the ones below it this way so that it kind of blocks it from blocks them from floating up. So I think this should be fine. Normally what I do is I put in a little jar. This is a half pint, but I have quarter pints that just work awesome for this. And what I do is I just set it right in here and I make sure that there's enough space for it. And because it is such a tight fit in these wide mouth half-gallon jars, I am able to then secure the lid with this on, and it pushes, and anyway, it keeps everything submerged, and it's so perfect. But the fact that I don't even have to use that, I've got that crosswise cucumber, I can just get that stuff entirely. So before we do the brine, I'm just going to give it a little bit more stir. Funnel is not necessary, but is always very nice to help prevent spills. And all we do is pour this salty brine right over all the cucumbers, all the way to the top. So you know what? I'm actually going to take a little bit of this out. I'm going to guess, based on the weather right now and the temperatures, it's going to take 2 days. I could be wrong, but what's going to happen is as this starts to ferment and bubble, all of those gases and things like that are going to start pushing this liquid up. And normally I get some overflow over the sides. I'm just going to use this regular lid here. You can use a 2-piece canning lid. You can use, if you don't have a canning jar like this, you can use any container as long as it stays covered in some way. So you can just loosely leave this covered and it'll help some of those gases escape. I'm going to probably check on it every day and just kind of open and close it just to make sure. You can also just cover any jar or container that you have with a cloth and a rubber band, or fashion something like that, and it does the same thing. So you can literally use any kind of container that you have as long as you can get it in there and fill it up. I just really like these because I have them and I love that they have a shoulder, and I really like the quantity. I have a crock downstairs that's a traditional fermenting crock from Poland, and while I like it and I've used it, I prefer these. I like these smaller sizes. I feel like I can manage and watch the fermentation process a little closer in these jars. So I'm the kind of person that really likes to sort of babysit my fermenting. And when I first started fermenting and I was doing sauerkraut, the recommendation is to just leave it for 4 to 6 weeks. And I had a really bad experience where I was fermenting a bunch of purple cabbage in my big crock and it spoiled. And I was not sure why, because I was following the instructions. The problem was that a lot of it had floated up, so I guess I wasn't following the instructions, and I didn't know that that was what was going on. And it was just more important that it stay submerged. So keeping things submerged is really important. If I don't have something to hold everything down, what I did before I found my trick and my system that works really well is that if you get in there with your hands every day, of course, wash your hands really well before getting in. If you had some cucumbers floating above the surface, you would want to just make sure that you rotate those with ones that were submerged for the last day. So that basically the same cucumbers aren't sitting there floating for more than 1 day. I think that if as long as they go under, and even if they come up again, those same cucumbers, it can be okay. But this way, by doing that rotation, or this keeping things submerged, really eliminates any kind of scum formation and anything like that. Of course, if you see any sort of white scum on the top, you can spoon that off. If you don't, it can spoil your batch of pickles. So you want to make sure that you are at least getting your eyes on your ferments every day, even if you don't have to do anything, just making sure that the top doesn't look scummy and there's no floating bits and things like that. But I haven't had that happen in a really long time. So I feel like my system has improved a lot. So I keep referring back to my dill pickles that I did, because you'll see these go through a similar color change process, just slower, because it's the process of that saltwater brine fermenting these instead of that hot vinegar and salt brine that's more quickly changing the color. So we will see the color change, and it will be and it's quite the transformation. But one more quick thing, I'm not even sure that I mentioned this. These just stay out on the counter. They don't go in the fridge or anything until they're done fermenting. Once they're completely fermented, these can go in the fridge and they'll stay preserved for a relatively endless period of time. But for the fermenting process, it needs to be at room temperature. So I like to stick these above my fridge. It's up out of the way, and they can just do their thing. I think that's enough talking for today. So I will be back to show you when I start to see some changes, what these look like. All right, today is day 2. It's been 2 full days and just a little bit more since we got these cucumbers in this brine. If you can tell, they are starting to turn into that more faded green, away from that bright green. It's still, it happens a lot slower when things are fermenting. When you pickle, they change that color much quicker. Everything is looking good. So look at all those little cucumbers floating up. If I didn't have that big cucumber stopping them, they would have been pushing all of this up. Also, if I just kind of move this, you can see some of the bubbles come up. There is bubbles starting to collect along all of the cucumbers and along to the top here. It's not quite to the point where this is bubbling liquid over the top. I'm hoping that we can avoid it, but I'm not sure that we will. But you can see that foam that's in there. That's the bubbles that's forming. And I see a little bit right here, and there's just these little like circular, they almost look like floating mold, but those will come up to the surface, and I am going to make sure that that was just a bubble. I'm going to make sure that I skim those off, but this is looking really nice and clean and clear. This liquid will start to get more murky, which is a good thing. That means the pickles are going to be zippier and have that nice sort of effervescence to them. Okay, this is what I'm skimming off. It's not this foaminess here, it's that right there. It just has a different shape and a different color, and if I leave that in, it's going to be bigger tomorrow. So I'm just going to make sure that I get those all out of here. The last thing I'm going to do is take a clean paper towel and just kind of wipe the inside of the neck of this jar. And that's mainly just because I use the neck to kind of pull out that stuff, and it helps do a better clean job. This will just make sure that there's no residue. So anything out of the water is most vulnerable to mold and scum growth. So once I'm done with this, now I'll get my cap on and we'll just let it keep going. Okay, today is day 3. This is all of that murkiness that I was telling you we would start to see. It's starting to get really cloudy, which indicates that that is all the fermentation starting to take place. And you can see that it's kind of coming up with the bubbles as they rise up. And it's still pretty clear down here, but this is going to be how the entire jar eventually looks. So we'll just peek inside. And I did already skim things off. It looked pretty similar to yesterday, just a little bit more foam, but this is just the view from the top. Nothing else is really floating up, of course, because we have our cucumber sideways in there. Still no bubbling over yet, so that's a good thing. Okay, here we are on day 4 in the morning, and this has just taken off at night. It's so much thicker. There's so much more activity. In fact, I needed to go with my old standby, which was to put this little 1/4 pint jar in here, because even though I had that cucumber wedged, they were starting to float around and move around. And so instead of trying to make sure that all of the cucumbers were staying submerged, this is a much more foolproof way to do it. And so every day I will get in here and wash this jar when I clean the scum. I did take out some of the brine. Hopefully it will not overflow, but if it does, I've got the bowl. And this is well underway. All right, we are on day 5 or 6. Honestly, I am not sure at this point. We kind of got a little sick in our house, and so all the days are mixing together a little bit. I am making another batch of cucumbers right now, and so I want to show you side by side what 5 to 6 days does and how it looks different. I mean, I'm sure you can remember, but I'm just going to show you side by side. You'll see a lot of sediment kind of on the tops of these things, and that's just all that good fermenting bacteria and sediment and everything like that. It is not bad if you see that. Oops, sorry, it's not bad if you see that. That's very, very normal. So if you do these recipes and you happen to see that kind of stuff happening, if you see that kind of stuff happening that's not moldy or bad or anything like that, it's perfectly fine. Lots of cloudy liquid all the way to the bottom. And these are looking great. I have not actually tasted any yet, but I bet they are very good already. One thing quick before I show you the side-by-side jars, whenever I'm doing a kitchen project, I like to think about how I can use a little bit of the food to make some food, because you got to be able to, you know, nourish yourself and snack and whatever else. And if you can use the food that you're kind of processing anyway, it saves you time and you don't have to plan something entirely different. And so what I do is when I pick my cucumbers, usually what I do is I usually have some bigger ones that they'll be good in here, but they're going to be way better in here. And I just chop them up and put some feta, some balsamic vinegar, olive oil if you have or want, and some salt. And this is amazing. My kids devour it. I devour it. It's so good. This is a ridiculously small amount, but we will enjoy it. It's super tasty. Okay, look at this visual difference. That is incredible how these change from this bright and vibrant green to this more dull but pickled and preserved state. It's just amazing. Now, these can go pretty much as long as you want them until they are sort of to their zippiness, tanginess that you prefer. So I'm actually going to put these in the fridge and stop the fermentation process. They are currently to our liking, so we'll just get the new jar going on its own. Thank you for coming along with me on this project. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we will see you soon.